Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking of Sundara, where I talk about Sundara, Dawn of a New Age, my fantasy RPG setting. This week, I wanted to give folks a bit of a behind the scenes and show how we're coming to something of a fork in the road as to where we go from here, and I wanted to sort of ask you, as our audience, which road you'd like to go down and what you'd like to see going forward. But before we get to that point, I sort of need to explain where we are and how we got here. Now, for regular readers, you already know this, but for those of you who are not, Sundara as a setting has been coming out for a couple of years now, and it comes out piecemeal in splat books. And the reason for that is this is sort of a solo design project. I do all of the writing for it, I do most of the creating for it, and it's a lot of time, effort, and work. So that's the way I can manage to do it. But since it's a modular setting, it also allows me to shift and change along with what the audience wants to see. So I'm not stuck designing things for what I originally made to be a tentpole that no one's really interested in. But if I do make something that the audience seems to like, I can follow that up and expand to that area of the world instead. And I've talked about that in previous videos, which I recommend going to check out. If you're new to the channel, this is the first time you've seen my face around here. There's a whole series talking about how I've been designing this setting and what all goes into it, which I don't need to get into right now. But Sundara as a setting has been coming out in phases, if we're going to use the Marvel Studios method. And way back when we got started, phase 1 was Cities of Sundara, which was pretty basic. It was going around to many of the major cities in the area and just giving everybody a book about them. It broke them down by district, gave lots of NPCs, notable locations, plot hooks, things like that. And usually a little bit of mechanical chicanery if you want to introduce some new toys for you and your players to have some fun with. And then there was, at the end of that initial phase, what I call a bridge supplement of Gods of Sundara. It was something that was a totally different topic. It wasn't part of a bigger series going forward. It was kind of a palate cleanser, but still something very useful that you could get and just kind of use on its own. After Gods of Sundara, we entered phase 2, which was Species of Sundara. And that was all of the different player species you could have, all of the various, I suppose we could call them ethnicities within each species. And then at the end of that, we had another bridge piece of Towns of Sundara, because we had had big cities, but we didn't really have any smaller villages, hamlets, anything like that. And that one seemed to be pretty popular. At that point, we entered what I'm calling phase 3, which is where we are now, which is mostly organizations and groups. Thus far, we've had Sellswords of Sundara, we've had Cults of Sundara, and recently we released Guilds of Sundara. Now, my hope is to get a couple more supplements for this phase out before I declare it over. And right now I'm looking at Secret Societies of Sundara, because that's just a fun alliterative title, and probably Merchants of Sundara, since it's always nice to have extra people that you can just go and buy things from, and it's really convenient if you're the game master not to have to make them up on the spot if you want to have really interesting merchants, brands, etc., etc. But when I'm done with those supplements, I'm thinking it might be time to wrap up this section and move on to phase 4. But at the moment, I haven't decided what phase 4 is going to be. And part of that is going to come down to you as the audience. What do you want to see? What do you think would be really useful? And part of it's just going to come down to sales of the setting. I'm trying to focus on it more now that we're past that whole OGL thing with Wizards of the Coast, and it's clear that I can keep making content for this setting. There's several plans, as I mentioned before, to start porting the things that we already have to other games, other editions, for folks who have moved away from either Pathfinder Classic or D&D 5e, now that we're trying to do some stuff that isn't strictly coming out from Wizards of the Coast. But with all of that motion, with all of that movement, it can sometimes be a little difficult to tell what it is players want to see, what it is game masters want to see, because if I'm honest, it's a lot easier to sell to game masters than it is to sell to players, much as I want to make content that's useful for everyone. With that said, I've had a couple of thoughts, I've had a couple of ideas, and if you are a person who wants to see more from Sundara, who wants to keep picking up the books, who wants to keep supporting the creation of the setting so that I can expand it, let me know which of these ideas you really like, or if you have something I don't mention, put it in the comments and let me know. Maybe it'll be better than anything I've come up with, and I'll end up going with that. But the initial thoughts, the initial ideas, were either Treasures of Sundara, where we just do collections of very large troves of items that people might find if you're looking for powerful relics or unique lost items. It's similar to other things I've seen, just collections of fun toys. I think that would be a really good bridge piece. If that's something folks would like, let me know. Apologies for whatever noise is in the background. But the other thoughts that I've had for Phase 4, I thought we could do finally getting around to modules, because again, it's a contentious subject and it's difficult as a creator to make that choice, because modules are traditionally very difficult to make sales of. Lots of people say they want them, but very few people will pick them up. They're also extraordinarily limited because you have the audience for a given or for a module's given game, and not a lot of people are willing to buy a module if they don't play that game. They don't want to translate it to something else. They'd rather just pick up something for the game that they play. So that's got a lot of pros and it's got a lot of cons. It would give people some actual adventures to play in the settings. They don't have to make everything up themselves. But at the same time, it's a very low prospect product in terms of sales. I don't know if we want to do an entire phase based on that. It's possible that I might try to do a module as, the bridge piece and see if people really like that. And if they do, maybe I could expand it out into a phase. That's just a thought. Another thought I had for Phase 4, since we have done a little bit of this going forward and people seem to enjoy it, is doing stories of Sundara. We already have a piece out there, Legacy of Flames. It's not by me. It's a great piece. Pick it up, by all means. It's very sword and sorcery. It's a lovely piece with a lizard folk barbarian as our protagonist. I think he's a barbarian. I have to reread the story. But, that'll be available on the Azukail Games page if you want to check it out. But the idea behind Stories of Sundara, because we have lots of little audio dramas, little pieces of fiction that have been in many of the supplements up until now, the idea I had would just be expanding that and just doing longer stories, either novellas or, just collections of shorts, things like that. Because I know there's a couple of people who have put out interest for that, who have wanted to see more stories from the setting to really get a feel for how it should be. But fiction has the same problem that modules have of sometimes it does really well, sometimes it goes nowhere. And so that's really going to be up to the audience of, is that the sort of thing you'd really enjoy, that you'd really pick up? Do you want to see more of my chops as a fiction creator, or do you really want me to stick more to the game design side of things? Alternatively, another Phase 4 project we could do is just going back to any of the previous phases and expanding on them. Whether you want to see more cities, whether you want to see more species, whether you want to see more organizations, anything like that, that would really be an extended Phase 3, but you get the idea of going back to the well if there's something that you liked in the past that we've already done, but you didn't get enough of it. Maybe you want to see a fantasy version of Vegas out in the mountains somewhere. Maybe you want to see dwarven cities. You want to see elven cities. You want to see places that are less metropolises and more specific to a particular species or in an unusual environment. Maybe you want to see something for lost cities, things like that. That would also be an option, especially if you're one of the folks out there who want to see more of Sundara's past that hasn't really been talked about a lot. There have been a couple of smaller hints dropped here and there, but there's a lot of societies that have collapsed, a lot of empires that have crumbled, and there's a lot of ruins if you know where to look and you're willing to accept the dangers of getting to them. But those are some of my initial thoughts. And if you are a fan of Sundara, if you want to see me keep expanding the series, let me know what you as a reader or as a player would want to see going forward. What would really get your interest and keep you coming back for more? I see those comments, my publisher sees those comments, and that is a lot of how we decide what we put our time and energy into. So, make your voice heard. And until then, when I have more stuff from the setting to talk about, happy gaming, everybody.